fine with that also. And hopefully everyone will learn lots of skills and have their questions answered and walk away feeling really, really competent in some of the beginning skills that we're introducing. So my name is Svea, and I like teaching and I like learning. And I'm not sure which I like better. I think I like learning better, but it's like I learn from my teaching, so it's kind of like I benefit from both sides of the coin, and I'm grateful. So we're learning about Chumash, and that's the title of our course is a Chumash course. When we talk about Chumash, I think before we start getting into any technical details or anything skill-based, we should really know what it is we're learning about, because it's always good to kind of start at the bottom and build in. I shouldn't even say that about Chumash, because we're really starting at the top and then filling in. So when we talk about Chumash, the shorish of the word, and we talk a lot about shorashim, a shorish is a root. So when we're talking about plants and their roots that form, sort of the basis, keep it grounded, we talk about the shorish. The shorish is the word for root, like in a plant. It's also the base word in Hebrew for the way that words are built. And we're going to see as we go along that when we become more confident and feel more comfortable with identifying the roots of words, it gives us more insight into its meaning. Because, and this is one of my very favorite soapboxes, in the Torah, will I be able to hear you, Annie? That is the question of the day. If you have a microphone, do you have a microphone on your computer? Can you, do you ever do video chatting or Skyping or anything? Yeah, you have a mic. Try talking to me and let me see if I can hear you. Oh, that's so nice. So you're pretty comfortable with the computer. I'm going to see if I can. I am allowing participants. I just changed my settings. You want to try saying something. Let me see if I can hear you. The answer is no, I don't hear you if you're talking. Annie, tell me when you're saying something. Let me see if I can hear you. Don't hear you. I don't hear you at all. Activated, but I did, I changed it to multiple. Try this one. Okay. Well, Annie, if your settings are already set that your speaker should be active, and your speaker obviously is if you can hear me, but that your microphone should be working, and if you're doing Zoom and Skype regularly, I heard you. Try again. I just heard something.
Hi, can you guys hear me? This is Emily.
Yep, it's amazing. It's amazing. Okay, I'm fine leaving that open. In the past, sometimes we've closed it because if there's background noises, it becomes very hard for everyone else to hear, but as long as it's quiet on your end, it shouldn't disturb anyone at all. So are we good? Okay. If we're good, then I'm going to continue. And if we're not, please interrupt me. It's fine with me. So the word Chumash actually has a shorish of chamesh, 5. And so when we talk about the Chumash, we're actually talking about the 5 books Chamisha Chumshei Torah. And that's often in English it's referred to as the 5 books of Moses. Is this what is in a Sefer Torah that's read in Shul on a Shabbos or on a Yom Tov? Essentially, yes. Having said that, the Torah really is much more than, and we'll talk about that, the Torah is more than the Chumash. The Torah is a Torah that is written, a Torah shebichtav, and a Torah is a Torah shebe'al peh. The oral tradition is how it's referred to, and it contains other sections known as Nevi'im, the prophets, and Ketubim, which are additional writings that were added on well after the Torah was initially given. Where does the word Torah come from? Torah comes from the word for hora'ah, for teaching. The Torah is a teaching document. It's a book that is a teaching for us. Hashem gave it via Moshe, verbatim, word by word, for our use. So here we have the Torah that actually predates the creation of the world. Our sages have taught us that even before the world was created, the Torah was in existence. So Hashem used the Torah as a blueprint of sorts for everything else that came later. It's the ultimate book for teaching. And there's a sage known as, it's a great name, Ben Bugbug. Kids love hearing that. Ben Bugbug, who we come across him in Pirkei Avot, which is one of the Mishnayot that was written and composed later on, but it wasn't composed like someone just had this great idea and said, hey, let's write down some teachings. It's our tradition teaches us that this was actually part of the Torah Shebe'al Peh that was handed down orally through generations. And as it became handed down, at some point someone said, hey, we better be documenting this so it doesn't get lost in the future. But Ben Bugbug said, everything that one needs to know ever can be learned from the Torah. And if we don't find it there, then it's not a reflection on the Torah, it's a reflection on our ability to understand. So this is a really big concept, is we're teaching Torah. We're teaching this teaching document, this document that's basically our blueprint, our guide that came directly from Hashem, and therefore we know that there's nothing random. And every single word, every single letter has importance. It has relevance. It's not something that someone just kind of threw together. And it's no coincidence that through the generations, so much care and attention has been given to making sure that every copy that is handwritten, because a kosher Torah is handwritten with very specific raw materials, and it's verbatim. It's verbatim. It's exactly the way it was supposed to be, and every other Sefer Torah is. There's virtually zero variation from Sefer Torah to Sefer Torah, so much so that we can find Sefer Torah that are hundreds of years old, those that are still in existence, and they're identical. And that's pretty big, because it's a pretty big idea when we think about it. So what's the Chumash? The Chumash is, in an essence, it's the 5 books that the Torah Shebichtav comes from. Torah Shebichtav. So we have Bereshit, Shmot, Vayikra, Bamidbar, and Devarim, 5 of them. In English, Bereshit, and I'll tell you what, sometimes there are ladies in the class that are more comfortable with the Hebrew. Sometimes there are some that are less comfortable. I'm happy to translate. I know that you're all Hebrew readers, but as far as levels of understanding, if I find that I'm just, if I get feedback that I'm nitpicking or I'm being too slow or you'd like me to go fast or lahavdil, I'm going too quickly or I'm using too much Hebrew, I need to know that because otherwise I don't know. So Bereshit, Genesis, refers to the very, very beginning. Shmot, Exodus, Interestingly enough, that the name in English, Exodus, okay, thank you, Annie. Thanks for letting me know. I'm grateful for that. The name Exodus that was given by non-Jews focuses on a main theme in the Sefer, and I am always fascinated by where these names come from. So the main theme, a big story in Sefer Shemot is our leaving the enslavement of Mitzrayim, of Egypt. Essentially in Hebrew, the name Shemot says, I hope you guys don't see that. In Hebrew, the name Shemot means names, and it refers to, and I'm teaching this year, like to another group, obviously, and it was really interesting. It really highlights how Hashem has individual care for each one of Bnei Israel, knowing them by name. So I just wanted to throw that in. Vayikra is a book of laws, and in English, it's known as Leviticus. Bamidbar, I'm just trying to Bamidbar is Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Deuteronomy. Yeah, Deuteronomy. Not sure where the English word, where the Latin rooted word comes from, but Bamidbar literally means in the desert. Devarim in English is known as numbers. And each one of these Sfarim was dictated on Har Sinai by Hashem to Moshe, word by word. And we still have the privilege of having access to it all these thousands of years later in the same form. And again, a very big idea that Jews throughout the world, throughout the ages, in every generation, have all used this same Torah as our blueprint for how to live. So there's got to be something just in that kind of staying power. Let's talk really quickly about the rest of Tanakh. Tanakh stands for Torah, Nevi'im, and Ketubim. All told, there are 24 books. The very last books were actually written, Nevi'im and Ketubim were not dictated by Hashem to Moshe. They were written by various other leaders throughout the history, throughout our history. They were all written, let's just say this, the last ones were written actually before the Second Temple was being started. So first temple period, first temple gets destroyed, Jews are exiled, Babylonian exile, Purim story happens, they return to Israel after they're given permission by the king of Persia and can start rebuilding, but they don't actually get everything rebuilt immediately. It's a slow process. It's an expensive process, and not all of the Jews that had been exiled actually return. There's only select few that choose to return. Many of them are very comfortable already and very established in their businesses and their lives, and they choose not to go back. So we've got a much smaller sampling of the nation, and they come back and they finish documenting the last of what are known as Ketubim writings. And these were writings by various leaders. And Second Temple is built, a couple hundred years pass, Second Temple gets destroyed, and here we are still today. Torah Sheba'al Peh, the oral tradition. Now most of us have heard of it. Mishnah, Gemara, Shulchan Aruch, which is the book only of halacha, all the books of Chassidut, the books about Kabbalah, the books of Musar, all of these are included in our Torah Sheba'al Peh. Sheba'al Peh literally means off by heart, that it's only orally. Ba'al Peh is used as off by heart. Ba'al Peh really means by the mouth. So this is part of an oral tradition Not that anyone made it up. Much of our oral tradition was actually given up over the generations from teacher to student to disciple and so forth, but many of the early leaders actually were taught, we're taught that they had Ruach HaKodesh. They had a divine, literally spirit, but we would translate it more in English as a divine inspiration. It's not that they randomly were smart people who had learned a lot and decided that we should all benefit from their brilliance. They're people who had a level of connectedness with earlier sages, with earlier leaders and Rabbanim and Kohanim and the Anshe Knesset HaGdolah and all of these governing bodies that had compiled rules based on Torah, had compiled ways to live based on the Torah Shebichtav in order to help resolve everyday concerns. So while, let's say, while the laws of Shemitah, it's a sabbatical year every 7 years, the Torah says the land has to rest. So it's a sabbatical year for the land. And that's given from the Torah Shebichtav. All of the little details for what that involves and what makes it okay and the questions that arise, those are things that are addressed by the oral tradition, by the Torah Sheba'al Peh. Okay, I could talk about this for a long time, but I'd like to go a little further so we can get more material covered. Interesting, at least I think it's interesting. Let's compare Torah and Chumash. So the Chumash that we're looking at, it has these nikudot, these dots. The dots are actually vowelizations. In English, we have vowels as separate letter characters. In Hebrew, basically, all the letters, they're essentially consonants, and the nikudot, the vowelizations, are added there to help us know how to pronounce these consonants. So we need that. And it's a good question. I'm not sure what the percentage that returned are. I don't know. It might be as low as 20%. We know that many of them assimilated. Many of them were lost. If we're talking about 20% of the ones who had been exiled at the time of the first Beit HaMikdash, that might be one scenario. But by the time, and I'm just going to digress for a minute. I apologize, Emily. Just to put it in perspective, by the time the first Beit HaMikdash, the first temple, was destroyed, we only had basically 2.5 Shvatim that still lived in Eretz Yisrael. The 10 Shvatim, the other tribes, they had already been exiled way before, in the middle of that first temple period. So was it 20% of the sum total of Jews that existed in the world? That might be a possibility. It might even be less than that. Or was it 20% that had been exiled at the time of the destruction of the first temple? I'm not sure it was that low, but I can look into it and ask if you're interested. So it's an interesting perspective when we think about how potentially large we would have been and really what a small minority of the human population we are. It's interesting. It's another big idea, not really in the scope of the class, but I'm interested in this kind of stuff, so I'm happy to research it. Okay, anyways, let's just talk real quick. Torah, Chumash. Both documents, both have the 5 Chamisha Chumshei Torah. Essential difference, a Chumash has nikudot in it. A Chumash has the dots, the vowelizations. I wanted to show you something. This side of the page, let me grab my pointer. This side of the page over here, Take a look. It's got the nikudot. This is a page out of a Chumash. It's got all kinds of interesting markings. We'll talk about what they mean in another lesson coming up. It's got breaks here to show where the psukim are, and look at all these extra little lines, all these little extra dots and markings. They essentially are the equivalent of punctuation marks. You know, this thing looks like a colon. It's kind of period. Some of these are like commas. There's markings on top over here. Look at all these little markings. Some of these little markings, they help us know, and I personally don't really know much about what they are, but I do know that they represent the musical notes. So when you're in shul and you hear someone reading a Torah, they're not reading it straight like you would read a document. There's a chant to it that's known as trope. And these are notes that tell them, you know, whether it's a rising kind of sound, whether it's an elongated but not necessarily rising in pitch kind of sound, whether it's like a stop kind of sound. I'm pretty sure we go into this in the next section, but I want you to just notice all these. We'll talk about what more of them mean. And then on the side of a Chumash, there's always going to be this additional column. Additional column, and very often there'll be stuff on the bottom too if you're looking at it. Lots and lots of things happening on a page of Chumash. Stuff on the side, we'll talk more about it in another class, maybe in the second section again, I don't remember which is which, known as Unkelus. It's a translation, and if you read through it, it looks like Hebrew. It's Hebrew letters, Hebrew characters, but it's actually Aramaic. And if you read it, you'll hear that it's got like, it's a little bit something that's a little bit different. It's Aramaic. We can talk about Unkelus another time, but this was the lingua franca of the day of the days of the Beit HaMikdash. This was the everyday spoken language when they returned from the Babylonian exile. So it's actually a language that's sort of similar to some of the local dialects. And if you ever have an opportunity to look inside a Gemara, you'll see it in Mishnah. This is the language. It's sort of like when people translate stuff nowadays into English to make it more accessible for non-Hebrew speakers. This is what they were doing to make it more accessible and easier for that generation to understand. Interestingly enough, on a Chumash page, you'll see lots of, different kinds of commentaries, and very often Rashi, I don't remember his English name, but Rashi will refer people to the Unkelus translation. It'll say something like Targum Unkelus, which is really, if you don't understand it, guys, just look and see how Unkelus translates it, because he makes it more clear. So I always laugh to myself when I hear that, because Rashi is famous. He wrote his commentaries because he wanted to make it easy for a 5-year-old to understand and be able to learn Torah. And I'm like, I can't even imagine how brilliant those 5-year-olds were back in Rashi's day. This made it easier for him, and here we are as adults, and we're talking about it, and we're often struggling with it, because the Torah it's a document for teaching, it's a document for learning, and we spend our entire lives trying to understand what it's trying to tell us. Or it's doing a good job telling us, we're just not doing a good job understanding it. So let's take a look at this page. Major contrast. First thing that comes to mind, there are no nikudot, no vowelizations. This should give a phenomenal appreciation for what kind of prep work has to go in when that guy, especially if he's a 13-year-old who was just first time reading from the Torah for his bar mitzvah, what kind of prep work he had to do to know how to read all of these words, and they have to be 100% accurate, and he's got no nikudot to help him. So it's actually a phenomenal feat, and like the more you know, the more you realize how much you don't know, kind of thing for me. Look at these letters. each one of these little, look at they've got like, some of them have crowns, some of them have like some little dots and stuff on it. Sometimes the letter is stretched out. See, some of these is stretched out. It all has to fit exactly. It's made from a parchment that came from a kosher animal, goat skin or sheep skin, from what I understand. The ink that's used is combination from a very specific source. I don't remember if it's plant or animal. I want to say it's probably plant. It was very common in early days that, there was certain fish that would give off inks and stuff, but if there wasn't a kosher fish, certainly can't be used for the ink. And it's written by hand, and it's written with a feather quill. Very, very specifically prescribed materials. Interestingly enough, there's very, very, very little variation in the style of the writing. Any variation is, for the most part, cultural, meaning Jews who came from Arabic countries. I'm talking about Persian Jews or Jews from Moroccan countries. They might have a slight variation in the styling, in the stylization of how the letters were written. The essence is identical, and even the stylization, many people wouldn't even notice the difference. Like, you'd have to be someone who really is familiar with the ktav, the style of writing. So let's talk about similarities, exact same text. V'sheva me'ot shana vayamot. And then the next line starts with vayehi. Take a look. Ushva me'ot, I didn't read it properly the first time, shana vayamot. And here, because this is a Homage, and when the Chumashim already came out, that was like printing press kind of days. So paper is kind of expensive. We don't want to make it too big, too bulky. Look what they do. They put a letter here to show this was the end of a topic. Don't have a great big long space. And then they start the next word on the same line. Vayehi. Noach ben chamesh me'ot shana. Noach ben chamesh me'ot shana. Okay. Vayulad Noach, and here we see that the lines are a little bit different. Any questions? Are we good? Oh, the space is right here. I'm sorry. The pointer. See this great big long space? Over here in the Torah, in the Chumash, they put a colon, like punctuation marks, like a period. Mm-hmm. And then they make, this letter is essentially a marking saying we're at the end of idea, almost like starting a new paragraph, and then it goes on to the next word. Here, you just put a great big space. Look at this. There are no periods. There are none of these colon things. See the colon things that work as periods? Nothing like that here. It looks like one break. It's Perek Samech. No, it's not Perek Samech. The Samech refers to, I'll show you that after. The Samech refers to whether it's open or closed, whether it's like a new topic beginning, like a new paragraph, or would it be a completely new chapter? So interestingly enough, when you look at the Sefer Torah, the way it was written in its original, we don't have parsha names, we don't have pereks, we don't have psukim, we don't have any of these, I don't want to say artificial, but sometimes it's like you could have continued that paragraph. You didn't have to stop. Sometimes the topic isn't necessarily closed, and it continues on into the next paragraph. They're artificial in a sense. They weren't in the original. There is some logic and to the way it's done. Some, but it's not the way Hashem gave it to Moshe. It actually was introduced centuries later, and it does, I didn't know when exactly it was introduced. I'll look for that, by non-Jews. It was by priests who wanted to be able to study. Hang on a second. Who wanted to be able to study and needed a reference point for where the Torah began and ended, or where a topic began and ended. Give me one sec. I'm going to see if I can find that little piece of information, because it is kind of interesting. Hang on a second. Here. I'm so sorry, I just forgot about it. It was Christians, early Christians, that wanted to be able to identify specific spots in the Torah. That's it. So it's not necessarily the way we do it. Sometimes it contradicts the way we would do it. Having said that, hang on. Having said that, we've used it for so many generations as a way of referencing spots that, as a way of referencing spots, and even tzaddikim have used that as a way of referencing places, that the idea has stuck and has been incorporated into the way we learn. And for that reason, it's not, we don't say, oh, phew, we're just going to ignore that because that's not the way the Torah was given to us. But because there is something that we can take away from, it's accepted. It's accepted. So, but when you look at the Torah, this version, it has none of it. There's no punctuation. There's no parshiot, sedrot, prakim. It's not marked at all. So the learner who's going to be reading it from the Sefer Torah or the Bar Mitzvah boy has to learn it. He really has to know his stuff. That's it. Now, back to this Perek Samech. This Samech, it's Samech for Satum. Satum means closed. When we say that something is stuma, closed, that what it really means is that it's a partial break. There is a connection with the previous topic, but there's a little bit of a break. It's a new paragraph. Contrast that with the pei for ptucha. Parshat ptucha, ptucha means open. And when it's fully open, let's find Anshe Hashem. You see over here? This full openness. This is Patuach. This one was Satum. It's open, but it can continue on the same line. Something that's Patuach is open, and there's nothing else on that line. It goes to the next line. And what does that tell us when it's Patuach? It indicates it's a new topic starting. It's not like the introductory topic and then the supporting details. If you're into essay writing or anything like that, it's a brand new topic. It's like turn the page, new topic starting. Are we okay? Questions, comments? Talking too much? Talking too little? Let's go. So, what else do we know about the letters? Every letter of the Hebrew alphabet has a numeric equivalent. Numeric equivalent, that means Aleph is the first letter, an Aleph. Okay, thank you, Emily. I so thrive on feedback. You have no idea, even just talking to me. I miss not talking to like a class, like real people. I way prefer that. Numeric equivalent. Aleph is 1, Bet is 2, Gimel is 3, Dalet is 4. When we write the date, We will write the date using letters. Does that make sense? Yeah, it makes a lot of sense because we have numeric equivalents. And there's a lot that's learned by these numeric equivalents. When we talk about Taryag mitzvot, 613 mitzvot, well, isn't that interesting? How do you have Taryag, a bunch of letters, referring to a bunch of numbers? So we'll talk about that too in a second. This numeric equivalency has a special name. The name is gematria. So when someone talks about what something means in gematria, and very often there's a lot of mystical explanations for things, two words that might seem unrelated actually have the same numeric equivalent, and we know that down, I use an analogy of an onion very often, where we see the outside layer and we think we understand it. It's known as the pshat. It's a simple explanation. You peel it back a little. There's a little bit more under there. There's more of an explanation. Well, very often you'll see two words don't seem connected, but when we know that they have the same numerical equivalency, then we know that they somehow are connected. So they're connected probably on a way deeper level, but there's definitely still a connection. So let's move on. I'm going to move my cursor out of the way. And interestingly enough, what happens when you get to Tet, number 9? Well, we don't go Yud is 10 and Yud Aleph. Well, Tet, Yud, and then the next one would be Kaf, right? After Yud. Look what happens. Oh, checkpoint. Sorry. You'll see what happens in a minute. Let's just see if we can practice this one real quick. I'm going to put a poll in here. Try this out. So there's a poll just below the chat. What you can do is look at the letters. This just shows me that, yes, I am making some sense. Look at the letter. And tell me if you can just put the sequence of numbers down. There's no secret or magic to it. Go ahead and multiple choice. Maybe it's the wrong poll. Let me check. Try this. We have a chet, an aleph, a tet, a gimel. Go ahead and type in the numbers. See how it goes. So what I like to do is I like to write out all the letters, and that way I can visualize it and then assign the numbers. Go ahead and give it a try. See how it goes. I'm doing it too. Anyone? Okay, hopefully you did it. And if you didn't do it, then the only results I'll find are mine. Why I can't see anything. Okay, did you guys do it? I don't know if I can't see it because, did you try it, Annie? Emily?
I don't know if anyone can hear me. I'm trying. I need one more minute.
Oh, sure. Okay, I'm reopening it. Go for it. I don't know if my screen, I need to adjust my screen because I can't scroll down far enough to see the results. Okay, I see mine. Doesn't help me much. Oh, there you go. Emily, was it hard or you were okay with it?
I think it's okay.
Nice, okay. Annie, you want an extra sec? Okay, I'm moving on. I want to show you what happens next. Okay. Next, what happens? You get to 10, it's 9. Now we start counting by tens. So Yud, Kaf, Lamed, Mem, Nun, Samach, Ayin, Pei, Tzadik, 10 through 90. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90. So if someone were to ask you to read a parak in Tehillim, and they said, parak 24, what would it be? It may not say 24 unless you've got an English one. It probably says Kaf and then Dalid. So Kaf Dalid, numerical equivalency, 24. Lamed Bet, Lev. Lamed Bet, so Lev, the word heart, actually has a numerical equivalency of 32. And when people talk about like Chai, Chai is always like, people give Chai dollars for charity, or they give gifts. It's multiples of Chai. Chai, if anyone ever received or gave Chai, then they gave 18 because Chet was 8. Yud is 10. 8 plus 10, you've got Chai. So here we have 10 through 90, and you can imagine what comes next. Want to give it a try? Okay, so let's type in the numerical equivalency for these numbers. I'm going to leave a space. You know that they're all multiples of 10. Kaf Lamed Mem Nun Samach Ayin. I made a mistake somewhere. 20, 30, 40, 40. Are we ready, ladies? Let me know when you're ready. Speaking up is good. Way easier for me. Okay, I'm ending the poll. Let's see how we did. wonder if I didn't submit my answers. No, I didn't submit it. Anyone else? Anyone submit this stuff? I did it and I didn't submit. Oh, here we go. Nice. Emily, you looks like you're super comfortable with this already. Impressive.
I took notes, so I had to
Smart. So when we have a one number in the tens, one number in the ones column, we have a combination. So everything, it's Yud Aleph, Yud Aleph, Yud Bet, Yud Gimel, Yud Dalet. I want everyone to notice this. You get to Yud Dalet, it's Yad, it's 14, but you don't say a Yud and then a Hey. It switches to Ted Vav and to Ted Zayin. And the reason is that this would be Yud, 10 and 5, Yud and then a Hey, and this would be 10 and 6, which is a Yud and then a Vav. And we don't do that. So rather than have 10 and 5 and 10 and 6, it goes to 9 and 6 and 9 and 7. The reason we don't do it is that these are both names of Hashem. And to use Hashem's name for counting, it's not so kosher. So we don't, rather than using Hashem's name inappropriately, this is our solution. And here we have a 100 chart, basically 1 through 100 set up. And 100, the next letter after Tzadik Tet would be Kuf. And then it starts again, Kuf Aleph, Kuf Bet, 101, 102, 103. Because after Kuf, from 100, I'm not going to do this checkpoint. I feel like you guys have it. From Kuf, 100, we go all the way up again. We get to Reish, 200, go all the way up again. Shin, 300, all the way up, and Taf is 400. So the highest number would have this 499. And then we start again with adding thousands. So to getting into the thousands, we're combining. So if our date is Taf Reish Shin something, it's 400 plus 200 plus 300. And that would give us 900. When we get to the thousands, we're just starting to add on, and it's something that's done for the dates. So we're actually in the fifth cycle of getting up to 1,000 when we're in the year 5782. Okay. Alrighty. Does anyone have questions about Gematria? I'm getting rid of this slide thing so that I can see the chat. Oh. How do I get rid of this? This is a new feature that I'm not familiar with. So this is actually very new for me. Let me just move it over. Pull close. How do I get rid of this? Oh dear. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. Okay. Okay, we're just going to have to pretend. I'm going to ask people, because my chat box is now hard to see, if you have anything, please speak up so I can see. Just not sure how to, there we go. Okay. I'm just hiding these. It's just cluttering up my screen. We'll get a chart to learn the numbers. So here's an interesting point. From what I understand in the course material, you can download a lot of different frames. So I would encourage you to be in touch with Javi if you're not sure how to download it. You have access to this material yourself, and the chart that you saw over here, that's probably going to give you all the information you need. This, combined with the hundreds, tells you everything. 100, 200, 300, 400. So here's a perfect example of how we can learn math from the Torah. So it's a philosophy that's a little bit hard for our 21st century brains to really, really get. But I've watched it in action. I promise you, it's so real. Everything, and I've seen it. I mean, obviously I haven't learned everything there is to learn, but the more I realize, and I find it exciting, the more I realize how much of what we have as a secular body of knowledge, the Torah has known about it, and it's been teaching people about this for thousands of years. So, it's really humankind's concern that we just weren't ready for it. I mean, everything that happens, really, we know it comes from Hashem, and we know that there are no accidents or mistakes, and yet, I guess this is the generation, or we're the generation that needs to be able to, take our logical thinking and accept that, the Torah was already there, like all the conclusions and all our findings, like it was there. We just weren't there as individuals and as a civilization to really appreciate it. So let's just wrap up some of our ideas. There are some vocabulary words. I know it's getting late. There are some vocabulary words that are worth knowing. And I'm sure that many of these words you're already familiar with. So when we talk about a Torah, we're going to be using a lot of terms in Lashon HaKodesh. The Torah is written in Lashon HaKodesh. It looks like Hebrew. Being able to read Hebrew is a huge advantage, and that's one of the reasons that it's a prerequisite for the course. You don't have to understand everything you're reading. You don't even have to understand a lot of what you're reading, but to know how to decode is essential. Lashon HaKodesh is not the same as conversational Hebrew. And again, having conversational Hebrew is an advantage, but it's not the same language. And as we go on, we're going to see that there are a lot of grammar structures that are significantly different in Lashon HaKodesh. Literally, Lashon HaKodesh, Lashon comes from the word tongue. It's used for the word language. Kodesh, holy. So Lashon HaKodesh is very similar. Conversational Hebrew is based on Lashon HaKodesh, but grammatically they have some very unique characteristics. Each of the languages, we're going to be working with Lashon HaKodesh, and some of the words are important. So we're going to look for words that are familiar to us. The word Kodesh, the word Ner, Shana Tova, all kinds of different words that we will come along with. Today we saw the word Perek and Pasuk. We saw the word Parsha. We saw the word Sefer, a Sefer Torah. Is it literally a book? No, actually it's a scroll, but we do refer to it as a book. We talked about a Parsha Ptucha, an open Parsha. So it ended and there was nothing else written in that line in the Torah. And it was essentially like the end of a chapter. Like we're talking about something very, very new. And then we have a Parsha Stuma, a closed Parsha, where we did end a thought, but we're not completely going off the topic. We're going to be continuing it like in another paragraph, and there will be more writing at the end of that line. And we talked about the word gematria. Gematria is an Aramaic word referring to the numerical equivalencies of each letter. So if neither of you have any questions, I want to leave you with lots to think about. I look forward to seeing you again next week. Well, like same time, same place. My Canadian flag in the background. Converted my son's old bedroom to my office. He's married, so I'm entitled. And I look forward to seeing you. I hope you have a great week, and all the best. I'm going to put in my chat right now my personal email. If you have any questions, I don't check the CyberSim email regularly, but this will pop up in my feed and I'll be able to respond a little bit more quickly to you. And that's it. Gematria is the numerical equivalent of words, not of words, of letters, and letters build words. So yes, we might say that a word has a numerical equivalency, but that numerical equivalency is the sum total of the letters. So each of the letters, and the more we learn, the more like you realize what you don't know. Each of these letters actually has unique meaning behind it. Even the letters are not random. Each one is a set, each character of the letter has meaning that's embedded within it. It's almost like a secret code. And so it means that words start to have more meaning embedded in it. And again, I'm talking about Lashon HaKodesh. Even though conversational Hebrew is derived from Lashon HaKodesh, that's where our roots come from, you don't see the same thing with all the words and letters in conversational Hebrew. And interestingly enough, a lot of the Shorashim are similar. Most of the Shorashim are similar. But modern Hebrew, let's face it, there were a lot of applications that were necessary to communicate ideas that weren't considered part of the reality in the time that the Torah was written. You know, words like elevator, you know, and there's actually an institute in Israel that is dedicated to finding and coining appropriate modern words to suit modern day needs, like the word for elevator, which is ma'alit. Now, what they took the shorish for going up, and they turned it into a word that would be an everyday word. Would we see that word necessarily in Torah? I've never come across it. But, you know, then you see a lot of words in modern day Hebrew, you know, psychologia, psychology, you know, where it's actually got a Greek base, but it's been adapted for modern Hebrew use. There's nothing holy about the word. There's no embedded meaning in the word. It came from a Greek root. So when we're talking about Lashon HaKodesh, again, it's built on the modern equivalent, it's built on the sum total of the value of the letters. And I should probably say goodnight, because the more I talk when I'm this tired, the less sense I'm going to make, and I don't want to confuse anyone. So I'm going to say goodnight, ladies. Okay. In the chat, personal email, feel free to use it. Reach out if you have any questions. I'll try and respond in a timely manner. Take care.